Who feels that they already have an important relationship with trees, something that's important in their lives? Ah, that's good, look at that. I'd say about 2/3 of the room. So we'll try and make that 100% by the end, but that's really good to see. So the tree that you're looking at now is more than 1,400 years old. Estimates place it about 2,500 years old. It's a yew tree. It's no wonder that our pagan ancestors used to worship these. They seem to be immortal. In fact, scientifically, we now know they kind of are immortal, because unlike other trees, who hollow out as they age and eventually decay, yew trees sucker up new growth from the same root system. So when the original tree trunk eventually decays away, you've got a new growth that is still the same tree. So really incredible scientific facts about this tree, but also it has been bound into our mythology for millennia. Now, 2,500 years old, you know, that's quite a long time, certainly in terms of our history of our civilization. But in terms of our relationship with trees, this is just a blink of an eye. Now, some of you will know which tree this is. It's not the oldest yew in the UK. The oldest yew is actually in Wales, the Portingale yew, which is estimated to be about 9,000 years old. But this is historically important because this is the Ankerwyck yew, and 800 years ago this witnessed the signing of the Magna Carta in 1215. So I thought it seemed like a good link with the past and with trees. But as I say, 2,500 years old, the blink of an eye, because our relationship with trees goes all the way back. What you're looking at now is a carved wooden spear. It's also made from yew woods, the same tree as the Ankerwyck yew. This is 450,000 years old. 450,000 years old, that takes us back through 3 ice ages when this was mislaid on what is now Clacton-upon-Sea. Auspiciously enough. Now, this is the oldest known man-made wooden object, but of course it takes pretty special conditions for a man-made wooden object to last hundreds of thousands of years. So our relationship with wood carving probably goes back a hell of a lot further than this. And we know our relationship with trees goes much further back. It goes back to the dawn of our species, because of course our distant ancestors lived in trees. We took our shelter and we foraged for our food directly from the trees in which we lived. And as we evolved as a species, our relationship with trees also evolved. And so we started by taking our shelter and our food directly from trees. And then, of course, we became a little bit more advanced. We started to create tools, like that spear, to be able to get our food from other sources. We started to build our own shelters from the wood that came from trees. We started to heat ourselves with fire, from which we created by burning wood from trees again. And throughout the millennia that have followed, we have continued to consistently depend upon trees and to build this relationship. It has changed as we have changed, but it has always been integral to our survival. And so the landscape around us is shaped by the ways that we have used trees, the ways that we have depended upon trees, but also we as a species have been shaped by this relationship. When a life form evolves, it evolves in certain conditions. If you think how we evolved to breathe the atmosphere of the planet on which we live, take away oxygen, we don't do very well. And of course, we know that oxygen itself is one of the things that trees helps us out with. So do we have a relationship like that with trees that is that integral? Ever since we were walking around for the first time, we've felt the need to have trees in our lives and we've depended on them. But have we outgrown that? Have we evolved beyond our need for trees? So we still use wood. Wood is still a very important resource for us, but we do have alternatives. We can create artificial materials. None as versatile as wood, none that are as sustainable to produce as planting a tree and then waiting 40 or 50 years. But we could get by without wood, you might argue. A lot of people would say there is no material that is as pleasant to work with, as beautiful, but we could get by without it. Oxygen, can't really get by without oxygen, but there are other things that create that for us, and we could even create artificial ways to do that. So are we looking at something that is more ingrained, something that's more hardwired into us as a species, as human beings? Because this is the oldest interspecies relationship that we have ever had. Long before we domesticated dogs and horses, long before we kept livestock, we were working with trees and we were depending on them. Science would suggest There is. We know through scientific studies that being out amongst trees is good for us. It's good for our bodies and our minds. And that's not just because if you're around trees, you're probably outside breathing fresh air and doing exercise. It's all of the sensory inputs that we get from trees and woods. So sitherism, I love that word, which is the sound of wind in the leaves of trees, bird song, which you wouldn't get without somewhere for birds to nest. These things actually have a direct impact on our brain activity, making us more able to deal with stress, more relaxed, happier. And take away some of those sensory inputs, trees are still delivering for us. If you have a view of trees from your window, whether it's your window at home or your classroom or your office, you are more likely to be able to deal with stressful situations. You're going to be more relaxed. You're going to be happier. It's been shown that students in classrooms where they have a view of trees are better behaved and find it easier to concentrate. Where wards of hospitals have a view of trees, it's been shown that people recover quicker. This is an incredibly ingrained benefit that trees can bring to us. And these studies are out there, so do search for them. I haven't got time to go through the stats. It's even been shown that a picture of a tree in a frame or on a screen is better than not having any tree in view at all. So you're welcome. And to take that one step further, if you are in a room with nothing made of wood, there's actually very little wood surface in this room, or if you're too high in a building to be able to see the canopy of the trees around you, having wood around you, wooden furniture, wooden surfaces that haven't been painted, wooden doors, even that makes that environment more conducive to your mental health. So we are hardwired to depend on our relationship with trees and woods. So while you mull that over, we'll think about modern society. Now, how would we do without trees in our lives then? We know that if we took away oxygen, we don't do very well. What about trees? Well, we've never really, certainly in this part of the world, had any reason to suspect that we would have any experience of this in our lifetimes until now. For the first time in our very, very long history as a species, we're in a situation where some people are disconnected from trees to the extent that they could go through their daily lives, their working lives, and even their whole lives without having this integrated relationship with trees. And that really is a first, certainly in the UK and this part of the world. And do we know what that's going to do to us? We don't, because that hasn't happened before. But those scientific studies suggest it probably isn't going to be great. But with the increased urbanization and with the digital culture and changing work practices, this is now the situation that we find ourselves in. A generation is coming up into society, and unless they seek out time amongst trees, it is possible for them to completely lose that relationship. And this is a spiral, potentially, because if you think about it, if you've got a young generation that don't experience the benefits of spending time with trees, they don't know what those benefits are, they've got no reason to try and seek them out. And what you don't know about, you're also not going to stand up to protect. So if trees and woods are under threat in the future, or if our access to the benefits that they bring is under threat, we rely on the generation that follows to be willing to stand up and say, we need this, it's important to us. And that really is under threat. So has it ever been under threat before? Well, to go back 800 years again to the signing of the Magna Carta, at that time, people's everyday lives were dependent on the trees and woods in the landscapes around them. People would go and collect their firewood to heat their homes from their local wood. And if they had a herd of pigs, which was often the way that free men would make their living, they took them into the wood to feed on acorns and beech nuts. So collecting firewood was called estover, one of these great historical words that isn't used much anymore. And keeping pigs is pannage, taking them in, knocking acorns off trees, which is what's happening here, so that they can feed. It's great winter fodder for pigs. Now, back in 1215 and the preceding years, what happened was that if you had a wood that was just around the corner that you'd used or your father had used before you for generations to keep your pigs and to feed your family and to get your firewood, a lot of people were suddenly finding that the landscape around them was being declared a royal forest. And that meant it was the king's land, it was the king's hunting grounds. And if you went into that wood that you've been using for decades and collected firewood or acorns, just the sustainable things that the wood provides, you were stealing and you were subject to harsh punishments. Of course, people needed to, so they carried on, but people were punished. And this was not a situation that could be allowed to continue because people's livelihoods depended on and had depended on for years on access to those benefits from trees and woods. A line in the sand had to be drawn to reclaim these rights. And it was done in the form of a charter, the Charter of the Forest, which you can see at Lincoln Castle in the vault. And this charter, which was signed by the king but not written by the king basically was persuaded, forced to give rights back to the people in these charters. It wasn't their idea. This was people power at its finest. And this declared that anybody could go into any wood, any free man, I should say. We're not talking about the serfs here, for God's sake. Any free man could go into woods with their pigs, they could collect firewood, they could let them do pannage, and forage, and even some limited hunting rights, even if it was a royal forest. And that was incredibly important for the people of the time. The nearest equivalent, if people remember in 2010, when the UK government tried to sell off some of the public forest estate in England, and the public outcry was unprecedented, it completely took them by surprise, and the backtrack from the government was forced. So our rights of access to some of these public forests was protected, hopefully for future generations. But a lot of the risks that face trees and woods today are a little bit more insidious. The issue with trees is that they live to a different pace to us. You can be born, you can live, and you can die on a street with a tree outside, and you might not really see any tangible change in all of that time. And so it's very easy for them to feel like background. In human terms, trees move very, very slowly. In social media terms, they hardly move at all. In fact, they only move once, and that is when they're felled, because that's the only time that you'll be able to see a before and after picture that looks substantially different a few seconds apart. And that is what motivates a lot of people these days. So if you think about it, if we're only ever motivated to stand up and notice trees and woods around us when they're felled, we're always going to be too late. And when I say felled, this could be by a storm. It doesn't have to be by, or by disease. It doesn't have to be by somebody with a chainsaw. So the issues that face our trees now are bringing us to a crisis point when it comes to the trees and woods of the UK. But for a lot of people, they're invisible issues. Things like the deprioritisation of street trees, where large trees are being felled because they cost too much to manage for council budgets, not recognising all of the benefits that they bring to people nearby. New developments where trees aren't being planted, or trees are being planted but they're very small trees that will never give that kind of canopy cover, the sitherism, the nesting opportunities for birds that large trees do. Trees are being replaced because they are dead and they need to be replaced, but then they're being replaced by small trees or not replaced at all. Our woods across our landscape are under threat from infrastructure development. We have a demand for housing, we have a demand for infrastructure, but more than 70% of the UK landscape is neither wooded nor currently built on, and yet hundreds of woods are under threat, more than 700 ancient woods, and that is the rarest, the 2% woodland cover that is old woodland from more than 500 years ago. Even that rare, protected, supposedly protected woodland is under threat from these infrastructure developments. We're not prioritising them. And then there are natural threats as well, exacerbated by man-made climate change, pests and diseases that threaten whole species like ash and now oak. And we risk losing these trees unless we prioritise action, and that's not being prioritised at the moment. So we need our own line in the sand. We need a new charter, a charter for trees, woods and people. And I'm pleased to say that there is one. It has been created. And it stands for 10 principles, which I know you won't be able to read on there. The Charter is launched on the 6th of November. It will be launched in Lincoln Castle, which is the site of one of the 1217 historic charters, so you'll be able to see them side by side. And this hasn't just been created by the Woodland Trust. This has been created by more than 70 expert organisations across lots of different sectors, all feeding in their expertise and their priorities. The principles that it stands for, 10 principles of why trees and woods are important to our lives, were formed from 60,000 stories that were sent in by people across the UK about why trees and woods matter to them. Some of you may have submitted stories yourself. But still, on paper, these are just ideas. For them to become reality, we need people to stand up and live by these principles and stand up for them when we see them being broken. And I'm hoping that those people in the room, and those people that watch this video, will be among those who do that. So please do, if you stand up for trees, sign the charter at treecharter.uk, and let's make sure that we have a future in which trees and people stand stronger together. Thank you.